Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. This is the Geography Taster session. My name is Lauren Martin. I'm the Program Director for Climate Risk and Society, Environmental Hazards and Risk, and Security, Risk, and Politics, all of which are hosted by the Geography Department. So thanks to all of you for joining. With me today is Miski, who's one of our current students, and she'll say a little bit about her experience on our programs in a moment, and Dr. Sarah Knuth, who's the convener of the Climate Risk and Society module, which is a core module for Climate Risk and Society MA and MSc. So Sarah will give a little taster session from that module, and I will give a little taster from Understanding Risk, which is a required module for all of our master's students. So it's a common core module across all three streams. I will go ahead and move through a PowerPoint. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of the teaching and learning on the program. So this session is very much focused on what you'll be learning, the styles of teaching that we do on the program, and then a couple of little tasters that give you an introduction to the kind of things that we talk about. So some of the content and also the style. So give me 1 second to share my screen. So once again, my name is Lauren Martin, and I'm the program director for all three streams. So I'll just walk you through these momentarily. Today, I'm going to give an overview of the course structure. I'm going to be pretty brief about the modules and the course structure. We have more information online, and there's some links at the end of this PowerPoint. But there are more detailed module descriptions there on our website, as well as an explanation of the course structure. If you have any questions about that, please at the end or as we go along, we will stop at various points and ask for questions, and please feel free to write them in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask in person. So I will give an overview, and then I'll hand it over to Miski to introduce the student experience. Then Sarah will give a taster from Climate Risk and Society, and then I will give a taster from Understanding Risk. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so most of you will be familiar with our three streams. The Geography Department hosts 5 taught master's programs, which are organized around the concept of risk. So we have Climate Risk and Society, Environmental Hazards and Risk, and Risk, Security, and Politics. So all of the students on these programs take a core set of modules together, which means that MA and MSc students all get some interdisciplinary training in both social science and physical science approaches to kind of big global challenges. So a quick overview of Climate Risk and Society. Here we've got the MA on this side, shared modules you can see here in the middle. So we'll hear from these two today. You'll have a little taste of those. And MSc required modules here. So note on the MSc side, you have a choice between 2 modules. This one is focused on space and time and understanding hazards. And the hydrometeorological hazards, it's basically what it says on the tin. It's focused on water and weather related hazards. So it's really the state of the science, but also goes deeper into the content of kind of what we know about those kinds of hazards. So they have slightly different inflections. STDH is more focused on skills and data management and data analysis, whereas hydrometeorological hazards is focused more on specifically water and weather related hazards. So we do some things on heat waves, floods, droughts, that kind of thing. On the MA side, we have a methods module here and social dimensions of risk and resilience, which is a year-long module, basically introducing you to social theoretical approaches to risk and resilience. On environmental hazards and risk, you'll see, again, a shared spine here of core modules. On the MA side, with the other students on the MA side, you take methods and social dimensions. What's special about the MA and EHR is that you get to choose one of our MSc modules. So for students who want a grounding in both physical, kind of quantitative and qualitative approaches to hazards, this is a great program to take. On the MSc side, you take both of them. So it's a really firm grounding in both hazards, learning about them, but also how to study them. And risk science communication is all about taking complicated science and communicating it to different audiences. So you get to practice doing podcasts and writing policy briefs and things like this. Security, risk, and society, folks, this one's organized a little bit differently. So you have some core modules that you take with the other students. And you can choose from some modules in geography, but you also have the opportunity to take some modules outside of geography in the School of Government, International Affairs, and the Sociology Department. So if you're looking for an interdisciplinary grounding, and if you want to have a basis in risk, but you want to take some politics modules, this is a really good program. So I spoke to someone from India today who was like, this would be really great. In the long run, I'd like to move into politics, but it's not what I'm doing right now. So a program like this introduces me to some really important content on climate change, on risk thinking, but also political processes and governmental questions as well. So that's a good one if you're interested in that. So how do we approach teaching and learning on our programs? We really focus on developing researchers and developing your confidence in your approach to research. So we try to build confidence, encourage independence, and develop critical thinking across all of our modules. So that means that in-class activities and assessment are all organized in a way to build students' confidence across the teaching weeks and through the dissertation process itself. So what will you be doing on a weekly basis? We've got a combination in each module of lectures, small group teaching, or more practical activities, and guided independent study. So you will be given a reading list, and we will be asked to prepare something for most lectures, seminars, workshops, and practicals. So we assume that you're coming in having done some of this background reading, which will then build on in the session. And all of that contributes to you forming a knowledge base that you then take into your dissertation and into your assessments. So I've given a kind of synopsis here for each one, kind of the kind of thing that you'll be doing in each of those different kinds of sessions and what kind of contact time you can expect. I'd highlight here as well that the dissertation supervision is delivered through one-to-one meetings, email, calls, remote supervision as well. Let's say if you're traveling to do field work. So that's a really important part of the process as well, especially in the summer months as people are working on their dissertations, like now. So we also support learning with in-class activities, but also with direct support on assignments and assessment. So we know that people are coming to our programs from different places with different education systems and from different disciplines. So we really try to scaffold the assessments in our teaching so that you're not just kind of thrown into the deep end to figure something out. So we give unmarked feedback on assignment ideas. So for example, essay ideas. We have small group discussion leading up to assignments and verbal and peer feedback. We also offer academic advising. So you'll be matched with an academic advisor at the beginning of the year, and that person is a contact that you have throughout the year if you have any questions or anything comes up. We also have dissertation supervision. So that's specific to the dissertation project. And your teaching staff is available generally for questions and concerns that might come up in relation to anything going on in your modules or questions that you have. So these are the kinds of assignments that we assign. So it's really specific to the module and to what you're learning in the module. So we think really carefully too about the skills that you're building across the whole program. And we try to develop opportunities for you to practice different ways of communicating with people. So this is a sample lecture timetable. This is indicative only. This is not based on next year's timetable. Just so in case you do come on, this is not indicative of what the days you'll actually have it, but the time period and the spread across the week. So people always ask me kind of what they can expect in terms of contact time. So I put this together as an indicative list of kind of what you can expect. So you can see you've got 2, sometimes 3 modules per day. Unfortunately, in the geography department, we don't have control over that. So some days, as mosquitoes, can be very long. And other days, you'll have completely free to work on your background reading or preparing an assessment or something like that. So you'll have a mix, and it will be variable. So people like to know this, especially if you're trying to combine it with paid work, for example. You know, how predictable is it, and so on. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot. You will usually have 1 to 2 days without teaching in the week, which allows you to work on preparation for the next week. And of course, and we don't teach on the weekends. If you play sports, the Wednesday afternoons are always free, and that's when a lot of that happens. We get a lot of people coming onto our programs interested in doing sports at the master's level. So in case that's any of you, that time is held for you to participate in those. If you have any questions on this, I'm happy to kind of come back to it and talk through it. So any questions on teaching and learning across the programs or about the weekly timetable at this point before I turn it over to Miski? We'll have time for questions for Miski at the end of her talk. So if anything comes up between now and then, just let us know. So I will switch to the next slide, and Miski, if you just tell me when you want the slides changed.
Perfect.
So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So I'll start first of all by welcoming you. Thank you for attending this meeting. So before anything, just a little bit about myself. I am an international student from Kenya. I did my undergraduate back in Kenya, and I did BA Economics. I am currently pursuing the MA Climate Risk and Society, currently working on my dissertation. I am also a Commonwealth scholar, and some of the activities that I have been doing on campus is a student ambassador. I've also been a faculty representative. I'm also the MA course representative, as well as sitting in different committees like the EDI, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, as well as international committee at my college, the College of Hill Bid. Next, please, Lauren. So why did I choose Durham, and why did I choose the MA Climate Risk and Society? So first of all, Durham in itself is a highly reputable university, so the ranking played a part in me choosing Durham, but also one of the major things that really influenced me to come to this university is the funding opportunity. As I've mentioned before, I am a Commonwealth shared scholar, so being able to just come and do my master's on a fully funded scholarship was one of the major influences for me coming here. Also the reputation and the caliber of teaching, being part of a Russell group of universities in itself is a good reputation, but also being at Durham, how we are taught and how we are able to interact with the professors and the lecturers was really something as an international student I wanted to come and experience. So that was one of also the influences for me coming here, as well as the research opportunities, the connection with the staff and the research, and also the motivation to pursue my course was informed by my line of work. Previously, I was working in sustainable, supply chain. So just the fact that our company was trying to move to a green logistics made me want to come and learn more about climate and risk, and just how I could like play a part in helping us as a company get there. Yeah. Next, please. So the support offered by the department as an international student just coming to the university and the department, I can say the department has been very supportive. So some of the things that have helped me as a student, one of them is the academic advisors and the dissertation supervisors. First of all, we are assigned academic advisors who just help you along the way if you have any issue regarding your education, or just any issue catching up with classwork or even social work. They are very helpful. My academic advisor has been helpful since when she was assigned to me. So yeah, that has really been helpful, as well as my dissertation supervisor. She has also been amazing. I didn't do a formal dissertation back home, so coming here and like having to do a dissertation was at first overwhelming and a bit gave me anxiety, but she's just been so helpful and just helping me just ease into it. So that has really been supportive. The staff are approachable and very friendly. I must say that it's really nice being able to converse with the members of staff without feeling intimidated. And that's one of the things that I really love about the department. Also, another thing is holding social gatherings to interact with other students, the Manly Room. This is a room where you can go have your lunch, as well as just have chats with fellow students, as well as the teaching staff. It's like an informal social gathering, and yeah, that's good. Also, having a postgraduate committee with student representatives. This is also another way the department has been supportive to us students. I have been a course representative, and this is whereby we just go and give out the issues that students are maybe facing, and then like the administration can like work on them and improve them in the coming years. And also the department holds career talks. We had a career talk back then, and the alumni are invited to talk to us and just help us think about our career prospects. That's really helpful, as well as EDI support services, whereby there's that inclusion. Everyone feels included, no matter where you're coming from, your background, as well as the level of interaction during class and the structure of assessments form the highlights of my course. I've through the past couple of months, just how I've been able to really improve in how I present and how I've learned. There's a big growth for me, and that can be attributed to how the department has been teaching and like the structure of assessments. Yeah. That's all for me.
I was still muted. I should say is also indicative of how hard Miski's been working, because I have taught her this year and she's worked really, really hard. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Miski? Let me see if I can. Just a minute. Cool. Right. We will have time at the end if anyone thinks of anything, and you can always put it in the chat, and we will make time at the end of Sarah's and my taster sessions if anyone has any further questions. So thanks to Miski for that. That was fantastic. Okay. So now we're gonna shift to a taster session from Sarah Knuth, who is the convener of the Climate Risk and Society module. And then I will follow that with a taster lecture from the Understanding Risk module. Sarah, did you want to present the slides yourself? Do you have sharing capacity?
Yeah, I've got some animation, so I can do that. I'll
Okay.
just share. Yeah, Lauren, if you want to drop in the chat if I'm going too long. I was frantically cutting a few slides. I'm like, how can I only do this in such a short time? There's so much I want to talk about.
Sarah
And
has a lot
Misky
to share with you all about.
and Misky, you've heard this before, so apologies. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. That looks like here. Here we go. That looks good, right? I think that should be fine. Cool. Yeah. So just to introduce this module. So we decided to do this one because quite a few of you will be taking this in kind of whatever capacity. So wanted just to give you a sense of the module structure, but also just give you a sense of some of the stuff we teach on it. And again, I'm happy to answer more questions about it. I'm sure Misky can as well to just talk through it, what it's actually like to do this. So I'll tell you what I think is happening, and she could tell you if we actually worked. Looks like I did this. So it has a few module aims. So for this one, this is an integrated module, as you will have seen in the track. So a key thing that we're always trying to do with this module is it's a team taught course. And you'll see this quite a lot in the Risk Masters. So I'm actually a human geographer. My original background was in climatology on the kind of BSc side. But then I moved into more kind of political economy, kind of economic geography, climate finance, built environment stuff. So you'll see some of the kinds of stuff that I work on in the taster that I give you in a second. And I'm always happy to talk more about that, either here or if you want to email me, go nuts. I'm always happy to talk about that stuff. So you'll see on this course what we're trying to do. So we have typically, again, it's usually 3 or 4 faculty, some from the BSc side and some human geographers. And we'll speak to a range of things. We're trying to cover both kind of natural dimensions of climate change, but also socio-political processes. So thinking about climate impacts, climate risks, and because we're geographers, we're really interested in how those play out in specific places, specific Earth systems. And so something we really are concerned about as well is this kind of line on unevenness. And here we're talking especially around things like climate injustice. How are we thinking about how risks and vulnerabilities are shaped by existing politics, existing injustices? So there is a kind of normative dimension or a critical dimension to a lot of the work that we try to do on this. So kind of existing social differences. And then, especially we're talking about research-led teaching here. So when we say research-led teaching, that's definitely something we try to prioritize on the staff end. So on this kind of module, we're really trying to say, what are you working on right now in terms of module teaching staff? Can you bring your very recent research into the classroom? Because again, it's very recent stuff. And it's exciting to work on these kind of new projects with people. But it's of course also something that we really hope you will do as students on these modules. We really want you doing kind of research at the cutting edge of these topics when you leave the course, and no matter where you're going from there, that we're figuring it will be very useful to you in kind of various different pathways. That could be PhD, that could be lots of different kind of professional pathways on these topics. So again, these kind of very fast evolving understandings of these questions. And thinking again about both the kind of underlying risks and impacts, but also really critically interrogating some of the kinds of risk responses that we see. So kind of climate risk programs, different kind of management tactics, things like disaster capitalism, so specifically maladaptive responses that we see sometimes. So a whole range of things. So this module, like a lot of them, this is basically a year-long module. For this one, we really finish up kind of before the kind of spring. So you're kind of done by April, usually with us. It's team taught, and again, it's both human and physical geographers. So what we're doing on this, so for the kind of first part of it, we are doing conceptual introductions. And something that we really are trying hard to do with the Risk Masters is to say, look, we know that some of you have actually had climate change courses before. Some of you have maybe done this at undergrad. You're going to know some of this stuff. But we don't want to presume that people know this, because some people have never encountered this before. They've only encountered it as a kind of thinking human in the world. So the first lecture block is basically, we're getting to speed on concepts around climate change, also concepts like vulnerability, which are kind of, you're going to be getting elsewhere across the Risk Masters program as well. And then the second lecture block is really, it's starting the kind of core material of this module. The point of this module, a lot of it is research-led teaching. And again, this is your research. So we organize it around kind of heart of the module in a lot of ways is these first two, this kind of second two blocks is this first, this lecture block 2 is speaking to institutional responses to climate risk. And so basically, I'll show you a little bit more in the next slide. This is a core research project for students in the module. So the first half of the module, basically, you are picking an institutional response to climate risk, lots of different kinds of institutions that you could pick. And what the lecturers are doing with this lecture block is saying, look, here's an example from my research of an institution I look at that's responding to climate change in this way. Here are some ideas. These are the kinds of things we're looking at in this sector, some of the concepts that are relevant in understanding different kinds of risk responses. Try this out. And that's where it's really important to have physical geographers and human geographers, because these can be wildly different. Across the years that I've been convening this module, we've had really, really different kinds of things that faculty bring in, and all of the students. We've actually, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, Miski, but you'd be surprised how different the student projects are year to year. We haven't had that much repeat year to year in kind of 6 years doing this. So, which I think is a testament to how interesting people are. So the second half of the year, very similar but we're asking people to focus on a topic within a climate hotspot or a tipping point. And without getting too much into the terminology here, it's either, particularly exposed places and systems, or, very decisive systems where you get a big system change. And that has this knock-on effect, the broader climate system. So kind of very significant places, very significant systems, but we leave a lot of the topics up to students. So, once you're in this kind of place or system, what about it is interesting to you can be very much guided by your own interests and your own research. So again, what we're doing with that lecture block is we're saying, hey, here's some ideas. This is something that I'm working on right now. This may give you some ideas to try out. Here are some readings particularly associated with this. And this is the kind of thing that, we're typically having tutorials as well around this to kind of say, hey, give us a pop-up pitch. Let us know what you're thinking about doing. Can we bring this into some of our examples to basically kind of support you in becoming researchers on this? And with the hope that this is the kind of thing that you will be doing in your dissertation too, kind of learning to do research and kind of doing it in an iterative way. We try to have kind of lower stakes, either a formative presentation or a summative presentation that's kind of lower weighted. It's like a 10% mark, basically to say, hey, try this out, try this idea out either in a group or on your own. And, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll give you lots of feedback. And then you have an opportunity to kind of hone that in the kind of higher weighted assessment. So that's what we're trying to do again with this, trying to teach you to be a researcher, kind of help you along that path of becoming an independent researcher. And then the second one, the kind of last block is where it kind of gets fun. And we say, oh, let's just do some fun stuff and some fun seminars and different kinds of blocks. Again, just kind of highlighting some different kind of contemporary topics that we think might be interesting for you. Again, really with an eye to stuff that's contemporary. Okay, so these are the research projects, just to give you a little more on this. So this institutional response to climate risk, this term 1, drought risks, could be tribal government risks. You notice that we're talking about different kinds of institutions, different kinds of scales, but also different kinds of risks. So maybe it's wildfire, maybe it's drought, maybe it's, the NHS. Maybe we're thinking about, something like flooding risks. We've had folks look at local councils. Something like transition risks by oil companies. So especially thinking about decarbonization there. And then the second time, again, it's even more open, I think. So, we've had people look at Amazon deforestation as a tipping point. Hurricanes and insurance in Florida is something that's really interesting. That's something I'll talk about in a bit. So as a specific hotspots. So sea level rise, resettlement, Kiribati as a small island developing state as a hotspot. Sometimes a lot of people will have people look at the Arctic because a lot of people are interested in the Arctic. You could look at that as a hotspot, very affected by climate change, very early affected, but also something that's a tipping point where we can see a particular So we can see that as something that actually is changing the rest of the climate system. So that's basically the kind of overall structure of the course, and I'm happy to take questions on that. But just to give you just a little bit more on one of these institutional responses that you might imagine for the first half of the module. So again, this is what Miski's heard some of. So something I work on because I'm really interested in financial institutions and kind of financial geography and kind of critical approaches to finance. So something I have looked at a lot is kind of big financial regulatory responses to climate risk. So, in this broader lecture, I would be looking at responses by the Bank of England, but also the US Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is a whole mouthful, but the FHFA is usually what it's called. And these are kind of, very large government institutions of different kinds that are responding to climate change at scale, that have lots of broader impacts on, lots of stuff on the ground as well. And so this is supposed to give you lots of helpful examples. Hopefully it does that. And there's a lot of readings attached to this. Something you'll notice on this lecture is very common across geography modules in this, in general, actually, but also in the program is you'll have very long reading lists. We'll usually give you a few that are saying, you should probably read this for next week, but also here's 40 more sources. What we really want you to do there is have those as a guide when you're developing your own research project. So you're not just starting from scratch. We've kind of given the best available kind of recent sources that we know on this. Very easy on this topic because there's still not as many people as I would dearly wish to be researching it. So take this as an invitation. Please come along board. I know Miski did a really good project on this for level 1. So it's a really interesting project to be working on. So just the overview of this lecture, the kind of questions that we're asking, we're thinking about these institutional responses. So in this case, it's financial institutions in the financial sector. It's like, let's step out of our comfort zone unless you do this already. How do financial regulators see climate change? And how is that different from a kind of lay understanding or even a very different kind of professional understanding? So how does the Bank of England actually think about the kind of risks of climate change? And there's all these specific kind of management responses that are germane to this specific sector. So things like risk disclosure and having different entities in society report their risks publicly as part of a management strategy, and often very much about how are we actually driving capital away from that and bringing capital into good sectors like renewable energy, for example. And then this is actually where transition risks come in. A lot of times we'll have folks interested in decarbonization questions in the risk masters in general, and especially this climate risk and society program. And so, we really want to give people an opportunity to engage those questions. Often we're saying, since this is a risk program, it is very helpful if you can look at that in terms of things like transition risk. So how do questions of risk actually come into decarbonization pathways? How do oil companies think about this? How does it change their strategy? What are they doing about it? And then this final question of, if we're de-risking finance, and a lot of times when we're thinking about, large financial regulators, what they're trying to do is remove their own risks. They're saying, we're very worried about a financial crisis because of climate change. We have to de-risk the financial system. The question that becomes for kind of climate justice interested folks, which I am, is where are those risks going? And are those risks actually being shifted to other people by those management strategies? So this is this question of, are the risk responses themselves also problematic? So here, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the US. You might hear, I'm from the US. This is a lot that's happening around the federal government in the US actually taking on climate change in kind of newer ways and saying, are they actually going to pull investment out of places that they deem inherently risky? And what happens if those places suddenly can no longer actually get the resources they need to respond to those climate risks because other kinds of financial institutions have said, bye, we're going to invest somewhere else now because we don't want to lose our own money. And so, we're thinking about a lot of different kinds of risks usually when we're thinking about things like this, how climate change interacts with financial crisis, but also COVID. But also, again, things like, large-scale stranded assets. And this is where we're thinking about transition risks. We're saying, well, gosh, there's a lot of money tied up in fossil assets. What happens if that is suddenly devalued because everyone's really pushing hard for net zero? What happens to an oil company if all of its stuff is suddenly devalued? And a lot of the push here has been to say they should be kind of withdrawing their assets from fossil fuels, but they should be doing it in a more organized way. And then these questions of, a lot of this stuff is probably going to happen anyway. And a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at recently is things like insurance companies withdrawing from regions and basically saying it's too risky for us to do business in these areas. We're going to pull out. So what happens to homeowners who are stuck in those places, who, basically, are threatened with major home devaluation because of this? So, okay. So this is a really interesting question. It's a very different face of some of the same things, but if you're looking at this like a financial regulator, you may be looking at these very different kinds of threats and very different kinds of responses, together. You're saying, a transition risk to an oil company and a lot of risk to homeowners in an exposed location. We think about it the same as the bank. They're all kind of assets at risk, basically. The question is, how do you actually manage that in equitable ways? Okay. And so this is this thing, we see things like green swans, central banks grappling with climate risk. And that was very much what MISCU was working on these risk disclosure things. So the example that I gave in my lecture on this was, again, the Bank of England. Bank of England's been doing really interesting things with this. So this is Mark Carney pictured here. And a really interesting kind of case in this sense, because he was basically hired to clean up some of the aftermath of the global financial crisis of the late 2000s. And then immediately climate change is really starting to come in as this could be the next big global financial crisis. This is a big enough thing that this could take down the financial system, which was not something that people were talking about before. I think some of us in the kind of field were like, yeah, this could definitely happen, but it wasn't something that kind of financial professionals were talking about at that kind of scale yet. So all of a sudden this is coming in and you have a lot of bankers scrambling to say, how do we actually deal with this? What kind of instruments do we create to deal with this? And again, very much, a lot of this was actually molded by the legacy of the global financial crisis, where they said, if a lot of homes are devalued, we know that this actually has caused global financial crises before. So, if a lot of homes in Florida are devalued because of hurricane risk, we have precedent for a global financial crisis actually being caused by something quite similar. So how do we think about this in the future? But again, there are all these questions about who's left out. There are a lot of questions also that I'm not talking about, again, the withdrawal of capital and how that's affected, but also, who is not actually seen by these moves to think like a banker? And the main thing that really comes out that folks like Brett Christophers have looked at is, there's a lot of the world that is completely off of the map of these financial pictures. So if you are not, if you don't have a lot of high value real estate as a city or a country, you're often off the map for these financial responses. And that really becomes an issue when we're thinking about the kind of resources deployed to actually manage these risks. Are these places not as much of a priority for those resources because they're not seen as much of a kind of a global threat? They're seen as a kind of isolated case of human suffering, basically, but not a financial risk in the same way. So really, really large equity questions that we have to grapple with around this kind of institutional response. So this is just an example. This is one among many, but just to give you a sense, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about in that module. And again, MISCI is another really good one to kind of say, this is part of it, but there's all these other pieces as well. So I hope she will. So thanks, folks.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. That was great to see, and I learned a lot from that. So, does anyone have a quick question for Sarah before we move on to the second taster session? Okay, I will go ahead and.
I should say I'm totally if you just look up my name on the Durham website, I'm easy to find. So happy to answer later.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, so thanks again to Sarah for giving us a taste of the Climate Risk in Society module. So as I said earlier in the presentation, that is a core module for climate risk and society students. I'm going to draw a bit from one of the earlier lectures in Understanding Risk. And this is a foundation course that is required for all of our master's students. So on all 5 programs, you'd be taking this together. So it's a very interdisciplinary classroom, and it's oriented towards giving you a grounding in different approaches to risk and risk thinking, and why it's important to think this way. So the module gives an overview of key theories of risk and key concepts associated with it, and especially different ways of thinking about risk in different disciplines. So the module includes physical and socio-political contexts, and as such, it's a very interdisciplinary approach. So you can see down below some of the different topics that you would receive lectures on. This is very much, as Sarah explained, it's research-led teaching, so it's very much dependent on staff research expertise and what they want to bring to the classroom. The module itself includes 28 hours of lectures and seminars. So next year it's going to be, this is a little bit different. So from what Miski had this year, she had 4 blocks. We've consolidated this into 2 blocks. So one in term 1 and one in term 2. And with roughly 14 hours in each term of lectures and seminars. Those are complemented with small group tutorials that are focused on building skills towards the assessment. And then it will be a 50% assessment following each of those blocks. So that gives you a sense of kind of how the module is organized, and I'm just going to give you a little quick taster. So what I'd like you to do, and this is often the kind of thing we would do in a lecture, is take a look at this list on the left here, where we have a number of different risky activities. Some of them will be very everyday activities. Some of them things you might do once in a lifetime, some of which you might avoid as much as you can. So I, being afraid of heights, would never skydive, but that might be, you know, on your bucket list. So just take 1 minute and choose your top 3 risky activities. So think about which ones you would put as the riskiest and on down. And write those in the chat if you would. Okay, fantastic. That's really helpful. So a lot of you very have living in the top in your top 3, so that's really interesting. Okay, so let's see. This is the ranking based on per million hours of activity. So this is a very particular measure. Okay. Because it assumes that it's possible to accumulate 1 million hours of doing these things. So things like skydiving, those only last 5 minutes. So you have to have a lot of skydives to come up with 1 million hours of activity, whereas others are ongoing and they're happening all the time, right? But this is the list from top to bottom. So just like to say that my fear of skydiving is entirely rational, having that at the top there. Let's see, and what did you all have? So you had on-road motorcycling, that's in the top 5. Water skiing is a little bit further down, but pretty high up there. Passenger cars, also in there. And let's see, where is living above passenger cars and water skiing, and but below on-road motorcycling. And let's see, where's residential fire on here? All the way down at the bottom. So this is, I should say this is very context dependent. I believe this survey's from the US or the UK or both. And so where you live will also matter. So building materials, whether you have live fires in the house, et cetera, would obviously change some of these. So thank you all for doing that. The point here is to get a sense that we all have a different kind of sense of what's risky and what's not risky. So what's more and less risky. And we also have different ways of kind of organizing this for ourselves. We tend to think that, let me just move this out of the way, sorry. Concentrated risk is worse than diffuse risk. Okay, so in an air crash, it's a high impact event and that affects a lot of people at once, but road accidents affect a few people at a time or a smaller number at a time. Risks to non-beneficiaries are worse than beneficiaries. So if you're not partaking in an activity, it's worse to be at risk from it than not. There's also something around voluntary and involuntary risks. So if you've got something that you've got to do versus something you don't have to do, voluntarily taking on risk is kind of not something that we consider a great activity to do. So we might also put skydiving in that, but smoking being one of the kind of top ones in terms of health risks. Imposed is less acceptable than risk undertaking for self protection. So if it's imposed from the outside versus something that you're undertaking in order to keep yourself safe, or a trade-off that you're making. Isolated risk with no benefit, less acceptable than risks incidental to a benefit. Okay, so if there's, again, some of this is about trade-off. So if it's seen as the trade-off between the risk and the benefit is insufficient, we generally don't appreciate that type of risk. Immediate hazards are worse than deferred hazards. So the future is hypothetical, and it's also abstract. So we prefer the hazards off in the future, the ones that haven't happened, to the ones immediately in our faces. So I'm going to click through some of these for the sake of time. So unfamiliar, unnatural, or worse than familiar or natural. So the unknown risk, or the risk that just comes from a general uncertainty, or problems or things that we don't understand very well. Those are worse than the ones we do understand very well, okay? And the ones that we can predict, and so on. So this list is really pointing us towards the kind of different elements of risk perception, and the ways that we perceive risk might diverge quite a bit from what is actually, in terms of the measurement of risk, presenting us and affecting our lives, and kind of presenting risk in everyday life. Again, because of this preference for certain kinds of risks over others, kind of have a desire to regulate and form policies and society-wide policies around certain kinds of risk, and less of an appetite for doing those around others, okay? So especially collective activities, collective and common, maybe widespread catastrophic risks, we tend to have a higher appetite for regulating those and a lower appetite for regulating these. So these kind of affect smaller numbers of people, or are more isolated, or perhaps the risk is considered an okay trade-off, for example, in the example of X-rays and vaccination, things like that. So when we're trying to understand how policymaking works, especially when we're faced with big future risks, such as those related to climate change or hazards, it helps to keep this in mind, because those risks that are have a kind of uncertain science base are far in the future and are kind of difficult to tangibly experience. Those we have less tolerance for regulating. So these are the kinds of things to kind of keep in mind when you ask a question of like, I feel like it's just so obvious that we need to regulate pesticides, or we need to regulate CFCs and make sure that the ozone layer isn't negatively affected by aerosols or something like this. But that's actually a really abstract thing for people to grab onto. So some of what we talk about in thinking about these things is the degree of signal potential. So how much is it going to register for people in their everyday lives? Are they going to be able to see it, feel it, touch it, and experience it? Or is it something that has to be a great deal of trust in the science has to be assumed in order for those things to kind of gain traction? So one of the things that we talk about a lot about in the module are these different risk equations. And so one of the things that Nick Rosser, who teaches this block, is really great at talking you through is how each of these different risk equations has also mapped on to different policy approaches. Okay, so policymaking has changed over time, and there have been a number of different frameworks that have been implemented regionally and also globally. And so how we understand how risk is produced from the relationship between hazard and vulnerability has a lot to do with how we go about making decisions about how to regulate it and what to do about it when we think collectively or at a political level. So I'm not going to go through these for the sake of time, but this is the kind of thing that you would talk about in more detail in the module. So definitions of risk are really critical for framing political action. So as a political geographer, this is very important to me. And that translation between what the science says and how we make sense of the physical phenomenon, and then how we translate that into political action. That is something that we talk a lot about across the modules on these programs. So I'm going to stop there. That's just to give you a flavor of the kind of thing that we'll be talking about and the kinds of issues that we would talk about in the classroom. And I will open it up again for questions. So we just have about 4 minutes left before the session ends. If there are no more questions, then we'll thank you all for coming. It's really lovely to hear from all of you, and we hope to welcome you in Durham in October. And thank you to Miski and Sarah for helping out. So it's really great. And I think it's given you a good flavor of the course as much as you can online. So yeah, please do, as Sarah said, please do be in touch. I'll put my email in the chat now. Please feel free to reach out directly to me. I am the program director. So if you have any questions specific or general, please do drop me an email. So lovely to see you all. And again, hope we see you in October.